Today's episode covers two disturbing cases of child abuse, each one hard to hear and both with shocking endings.
And you'll want to wait around until the end of the second case. The ending will make you want to flip your table over.
Listener discretion is strongly advised. This episode contains details involving harm to children. Welcome to Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide. We're Kai's AI co-hosts, bringing you your Florida Man Friday case, researched and written by Kai. Before we begin, remember that Love and Murder is completely listener-funded, so if you want to help us keep sharing these stories and giving victims a voice, join the Lamb Fam at patreon.com/loveandmurder. You'll get ad-free episodes, bonus cases, and exclusive content while supporting a show that speaks for those who can't. Patreon.com/loveandmurder.
Now let's get into today's Florida Man Friday cases.
The 911 call came in on the afternoon of April the 22nd, 2023. Deputies with the Polk County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to a home in Eagle Lake, Florida, for a child drowning. When first responders walked into that bathroom, they found 6-year-old Anthony Rouse unresponsive in the tub. He was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital in Tampa and put on life support, but he showed no brain activity. 2 days later, on April 24th, he was pronounced dead. His mother, Elise Seymour, who also goes by Elise Blancita Rivera, and her husband, Trey Seymour, said it was a suicide. A 6-year-old suicide. Anthony's foster mother, Casey Metzger, remembered him as a really happy baby who loved swimming. His biological father, Anthony Rouse, a commercial fisherman, said Anthony was an energetic person who loved fishing so much he once pulled in a 25-pound stingray. He was offshore working when Anthony died and learned what happened only when he got back. Anthony had asked for a Nintendo Switch and Paw Patrol games in the last conversation Andre ever had with him. Andre had raised him for most of the past 4 years, until losing custody because of a domestic violence incident with an ex-girlfriend. Anthony was only 5 when he was placed back with Elise. She was 25 at the time, and Trey was 27. 6 other children lived in the home with them. When investigators got warrants for Ali's and Trey's phones, their text messages told the whole story, and it was worse than anything anyone imagined. They had a dog cage in the garage, a full-sized crate, where they routinely locked Anthony for hours. They even used it to hide him when people came over. 9 days before Anthony died, on March 31st, they texted back and forth about how he got caught stealing, quote, a handful of noodles. For that, he was put in the cage, escaped, and then was put right back inside. The next night, April 1st, Elise was furious. She wrote,
Bro, I'm gonna end up killing this fat brat. My house is getting freaking dirty 'cause of him. Walls in the garage turning freaking black. Got marks and stuff like, bro.
And then she sent Trey a video of Anthony locked inside the cage, texting,
He can stay in that freaking crap and rot.
The abuse was non-stop. On April 2nd, she told Trey he, quote, stayed up all night drunk, torturing Anthony. On April 4th and April 7th, she texted, I hate him. On April 15th, she said she didn't know if Anthony had hurt himself because she was, quote, too busy with the other kids I love and care about. The day before he died, April 21st, she texted, I want to put him up for adoption. And then, in one of the most disturbing messages in this entire case, she told Trey that if she ever killed Anthony, she would do it to the song Street Runner by Rod Wave. Elise didn't just abuse Anthony herself, she got the other kids involved. Investigators found that she'd made a reward system with candy or food if the siblings helped beat him or lock him in the cage. The signs of long-term abuse were everywhere. Hospital staff noticed scars, cigarette burns, rectal bleeding, and injuries that had healed and was re-injured. In addition to all of this, their living conditions were horrible. The kids' bedroom was piled with clothes soaked in urine and feces. The room had no electricity, and the door lock was installed backwards so the kids could be locked in from the outside. Anthony had medication he needed, but he wasn't getting it. And that brings us back to April 22nd. Elise told police she locked Anthony in the bathroom and told him to take a bath because he had urinated on himself. She claimed that she checked on him 20 minutes later after scrolling through TikTok and found that the door was locked. She had to pry it open with a fork, and that's when she found him face down in the water. Then she changed her story again and said she, quote, could not remember the incident clearly because when she thinks about it, she gets anxiety. Trey claimed that he found Anthony and started CPR, but none of that was true. Detectives discovered that the breakers to that bathroom had been cut. The room was deliberately left completely dark, no electricity and no natural light. They also learned that Anthony was forced to use that specific bathroom because Elise didn't trust him in the master bathroom where everything actually worked. It wasn't until May 3rd, when one of the siblings finally broke down during a second interview, that the truth came out. He admitted he had lied at first because Elise threatened him. She told him if he told the truth, Trey would go to jail, and if Trey went to jail, she would choke him. The sibling told investigators that Anthony had gotten in trouble for stealing food again, and in their house, going swimming didn't mean playing in the water. It meant drowning. He demonstrated to detectives how Trey held Anthony's head underwater. He said Trey used a choke hold on all the boys to make them sleep, and he watched Trey drown his brother.
That child carried that secret until he couldn't anymore.
Then the autopsy came back and showed what everyone already suspected. Anthony had suffered years of abuse. Once investigators had the messages, the autopsy, the sibling interviews, and the conditions inside the house, the story was clear. Anthony didn't drown in an accident. He didn't drown alone. He wasn't suicidal. He was drowned on purpose. Polk County investigators arrested Elise and Trey in May 2023. All of the surviving children were immediately removed and placed with the Department of Children and Families. Then, on August 31st, 2023, a grand jury indicted both of them on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, 2 additional felony child abuse charges, and causing a minor to become delinquent or dependent. On top of that, Elise was hit with a charge for tampering with a witness in a capital felony case because she threatened her own child into lying. Both were held without bond. At first, both of them did exactly what people like them always do. They pleaded not guilty, but you can only run from the evidence for so long, and Trey broke first. On January 22nd, he took a plea deal. Instead of going to trial for first-degree murder, he pled guilty to lesser charges: second-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, child abuse, and causing a minor to become delinquent or dependent. That plea saved him from the death penalty and from the possibility of life without parole. Instead, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And the biggest condition? He had to agree to testify against Elise at her trial. The plan was to move forward with jury selection for Elise on July 28, 2025. She was staring down first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, child abuse, and the witness tampering charge. But just moments before jury selection was supposed to begin, Elise folded. She signed a plea agreement right there on the spot. She pled guilty to only 2 counts of aggravated child abuse. That's it. Not the murder charge, not the manslaughter charge. She pled to the abuse, and the rest was dropped as part of the agreement. A judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison on each count, to be served concurrently, and she avoided a murder trial altogether. Trey gets 30 years, she gets 20, and Anthony gets a headstone. The thing that sticks with me, beyond the messages, beyond the cage, beyond everything, is that the final moments of Anthony's life were in a dark bathroom, with the breakers turned off, while the person who was supposed to protect him held his head underwater. Anthony was 6. He would have been alive, asking for snacks, still running around outside, still calling his dad to talk about what he caught that day. Instead, his life ended in a bathroom with no light, and his killers, because that's what they are, will eventually walk free again. Even Sheriff Grady Judd said, quote, Jail is too good for them. And honestly, after going through the details of this case, I agree with him wholeheartedly. And that's the end of the first case. Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments below or over in the Patreon. patreon.com/loveandmurder. The next case happened on July 3rd, 2025, when Columbia County deputies were asked by DCF to help with a court-ordered pickup of 9 children from the home of Brian and Jill Griffith in Fort White, Florida. The Griffiths weren't a small household. 4 adults lived there: Brian, who was 47, Jill, who was 41, and their adult children, 21-year-old Dallin and 19-year-old Liberty. They were raising 9 minor children between the ages of 7 and 16. 5 were their biological kids, and 4 were adopted privately back in Arizona. Altogether, the family of 13 moved into a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom mobile home when they came to Fort White in 2024. And right away, people around them began noticing things that didn't feel right. A few days before the state moved in, one of the children showed up to a church camp with an electronic stun gun. Brian tried to play it off, saying it was a fake toy, but police later confirmed it was real. That alone didn't trigger the investigation, but it added to a growing stack of concerns. A church employee contacted DCF, saying that they were worried the adopted children, mostly black children, were being treated differently from the biological kids. It was described as the adopted kids being workers, not family members. And when investigators visited the home, that's exactly what they said they saw happening: the adopted kids doing chores while the biological children played or watched TV. Even basic information was off. Some of the children didn't know their own birthdays. During supervised conversations, the kids would look at Jill for the answer, or she would pull out her phone to check. Jill didn't want investigators talking to the kids at all at first, which didn't help her case. There had also been a 10th foster child, another girl who lived with them in 2024. She wasn't there anymore because she'd called her mother in Arizona, crying and begging to be taken home. Afterward, that Arizona mother told investigators that at least one adult in the house had sexually assaulted at least one child. The documents were heavily redacted, but the allegation was there. Once the July 3rd pickup happened and the 9 children were removed, Child Protection Team investigators began interviewing them. That's where the real picture came out. One of the boys, 14 years old, said he was locked under the bottom bunk of a 3-tier bed most of the day and night. The adults used plywood to seal him in and a green drill to screw it down because, according to them, he had a tendency to steal. He was only let out for lunch, dinner, or when the other boys asked. At night, if he had to use the bathroom, he said he had to hold it until morning. 2 younger children, ages 9 and 7, backed up his story. And it wasn't just confinement, the kids described physical punishments too. Brian was accused of beating the adopted children with a cane but being careful not to leave a mark. Jill had her own system. According to a boy who lived it, she would force him to lie on the floor, put a sheet of plywood over his body, and press down hard enough that he got splinters and scars. He told investigators that she once unscrewed the plywood to take it off, pressed it onto him again, then screwed it back in place so he couldn't get out. Another child said they were sprayed in the face with vinegar. A 14-year-old girl said Jill would spray her before bed, and the vinegar burned her eyes, making her cry herself to sleep. None of the kids described a home where they felt safe. They said they were given medications that weren't prescribed to them. Some said their doors were locked at night. Others said they were instructed to lie to investigators. And when it came to education, the story didn't get any better. One girl said she couldn't read, didn't know her grade level, and hadn't been to school in 6 or 7 years. Meanwhile, the biological kids had cell phones, and the foster or adopted kids did not. Jill told one of the girls she would get a phone when she learned to read. With those interviews, the state moved forward. On July 22, 2025, all 4 adults, Brian, Jill, Dallin, and Liberty, were arrested and charged with aggravated child abuse. They were taken to the Columbia County Detention Center. bond was set at $500,000 for each of them at first, though later documents showed Jill's bond listed at $1.5 million. Dallin and Liberty eventually had their bond lowered. From the outside, it looked like the start of a major child abuse prosecution, one that had multiple victims, detailed statements, and physical descriptions that matched what investigators reportedly saw inside that home. But this case was about to take a hard left turn. By the time investigators finished removing the children and filing charges, it looked like the state had an airtight case. 9 kids telling similar stories, a 10th child in Arizona who had begged to leave, descriptions of cages, plywood, vinegar, canes, and constant chores while the biological kids played. Anyone watching this unfold would have assumed the next step was a trial that would take months. But instead, everything flipped almost overnight. By late October, prosecutors made a move nobody expected. They dropped every single charge against Brian, Jill, Dallin, and Liberty. They said they were dismissing the case in the interest of justice, which is usually code for, we can't prove this in court, so we're backing out. And when the dismissal paperwork became public on November 3rd, it became clear the prosecution had changed how they viewed almost every allegation. Most of that reversal centered on one child, the same child who had described being locked under the bunk bed. According to the dismissal, the defense brought forward what prosecutors called copious evidence about that child's history of violence toward other kids, adults, and even animals, and said he had been removed from the home because of his behavior. That new information, they argued, would make a jury see the family not as abusers, but as overwhelmed parents addressing the situation in a manner they deem appropriate, while trying to protect the other children in a very small house. The prosecutors wrote that they cannot refute such an argument. And that wasn't the only thing that suddenly got reinterpreted. The vinegar, which multiple kids described being sprayed directly into their eyes, was reframed as a diluted homemade version of something called sassy spray, which the state described as a modern version of soap in the mouth. The prosecution even said some of the original allegations came from what they now called salacious gossip. And they criticized DCF investigators for what they called incredulous statements that got the case started in the first place. And just like that, after weeks of graphic allegations and a mountain of interviews, everything collapsed. No trial, no jury, no verdict, no sentencing. On October 31st, 2025, every charge was dropped. The Griffiths walked away without a criminal record from this case, and the state closed the file. The ending didn't match the beginning at all. What started as a horrific picture painted by 9 children, a foster child who fled back to Arizona, and a mandatory reporter terrified about what was happening inside that house, ended with prosecutors defending the parents' actions and calling the original complaints gossip. And that's where the story ends, not with a courtroom showdown or a verdict, but with a legal system deciding it didn't have the evidence to move forward. Whether that was the right call depends entirely on who you believe. And that's where we're ending today's Florida Man Friday episode. 2 cases that never should have been allowed happened, 2 children who deserved so much better, and a reminder that the danger isn't always from strangers, it's often from those right inside their home.
If you suspect child abuse, call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD or 1-800-422-4453 or go to childhelp.org. All calls are toll-free and confidential. The hotline is available 24/7 in more than 170 languages.
What did you think of these cases? Let us know in the comments below or over in the Patreon. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. Kai always wants to hear your thoughts. And if you want extras like exclusive bonus episodes, cases too sensitive to put out to the public, case extras, and more, then join the Lamb Fam on Patreon at patreon.com/loveandmurder. If you want in, it's cheap, starting at $3 or $5 depending on what bonuses you're looking for. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. The link is also in the show notes below. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in the next episode.